Hi, this is James Zhang, and I'm here with Bryan Amos. And today we're going to be talking about what he does. And most people know what you do, Bryan, but maybe give people an overview of what you do, and then we'll just sort of dive into what you've been seeing now, sort of post COVID.
Sure. Hey, thanks, James. Glad to be on. And so, just a little bit about me. So, I'm a former engineer that got into single family homes. And then for the last 10 years, I've been in multifamily and started with due diligence. That's kind of my bread and butter. And then, so many people ask me, hey, you told me everything that needs to be done. Can you fix it? So, we started a construction company a few years back. And then finally, I'm an investor myself. And so always looking at everything I do from the investor standpoint. And so we do due diligence and then construction and also invest in multifamily apartments.
Great. So what has changed? And you can sort of those pillars, those three different pillars. Maybe talk about all right. Everything was going well in February, and then March hit, and then COVID happened. So what has changed for you in those three different pillars?
Okay, so due diligence follows any deals.
All right.
So due diligence went to zero.
Okay.
So
All
when
right.
COVID happened, just nothing happened.
Okay.
And so construction, we had some large projects on our own properties that we're working on, but many people pulled those funds back and decided to just hold off, just to see what happens.
All right.
And so few were in progress, and that kept us going. But it really slowed down. Now people are coming back saying, okay, we'll start these capital projects again. We'll start doing some more exterior repairs and unit upgrades. So it's starting to thaw a little bit.
Okay, good. And then sort of on your properties, what are you seeing sort of collection wide, and sort of what are you doing as an investor right now
Yeah.
in preparation?
So we have a couple of properties, and one where we're really close to normal almost. We're about 8% off.
Okay.
And then the other one has a little more hard hit because it's more of that working class B class that was an office professional, the worker server at a restaurant, and so those jobs got hit. And so because the other property is more of construction based, more
Okay.
the laborer, right? That
Okay.
actually did better. But office workers, young professionals, things that, so there it's about 15% behind
Okay.
overall, right?
Okay.
Um, so and the last thing you're talking about, any new deals, well, they're starting to come around. And so again, assessments is starting to pick up as deals start to come out. So we're starting to see things return for the better.
If okay, so we'll take this. We could go an hour, but what I'm seeing a lot of people do is they start with a C deal, they own that deal for a little bit, they move up to a B deal, and then they own that for a little bit, and now they move up to an A deal because we're seeing cap rates compress so significantly across product type, and so they're just like, I'm just going to buy a newer property. So maybe take each property type and tell me one or two things that if I'm buying that property type, what is the number one thing that I should be looking for at that property?
Okay. So a C deal is generally your oldest deal. You have lower income in that area too. That's another way to look at it. It's generally a flat roof. So I'm concerned about the roof and if it has a chiller or boiler system. These are the main things for C deals to look out for, to kind of be wary of. And there you're depending on what is the seller telling you about the service history. Has the roof been replaced? Has the chiller been replaced? We just recently did a property due diligence, and there are window units everywhere.
Hmm.
So and they said the chiller is working great. Well, it wasn't a few months ago because there's all these window units.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So on that real quick, how long and how long does a flat roof typically last? And then how much does it cost to replace for the roof and the chiller if you had the ballpark it?
Sure. So the roof is generally going to last about 20 years.
Okay.
So now you need to update it So if you're talking about a 1960s property, you've had a couple of roofs during, its lifetime. Right?
Sure.
On the chiller, if you had a water cooled chiller, it's about $850 per ton. Well, tonnage is based on how many units you have, how much it serves. So you're looking about maybe 60 to 80 grand on a smaller property. And an air cooled chiller, it's about $1,000 to $1,100 per ton. There's more in it, so overall that cost could be less. But so you're looking at a 100-unit property. It's generally going to have like 125 to 140 ton chiller. That could be 140 to 150,000. So big ticket items.
Big ticket. All right. So that's on the C stuff, flat roof, chiller. If we move to B, sort of 1980s, what are you seeing there?
So 1980s construction, you're going to have, your plumbing's going to be better, mostly PVC from that time, pitched roof, more individual buildings. And there again, so roof's a big deal always. And here in DFW foundation, you start to see issues with soil movement. So where it's located is a concern. And then here we just, pass through the hottest part of the summer, AC. Your HVAC, make sure you have that in your budget. That's one thing I see people miss a lot of times.
And then moving up, so let's skip sort of the A- stuff and move into sort of like the A wrap style with the elevators and the parking garage. What are you seeing there that people maybe are missing or under budgeting for?
Okay. So I've recently done a lot of new construction, and you'll be surprised at what gets passed because you got a green tag, right? This is new construction. It's really the roof is the number one thing that I come across.
Is it flat?
So it's going to be pitched. It's going to be nice pitched, but maybe the shingles weren't installed correctly, or they cut corners and they didn't paint where you can't see on the eaves, so the wood's going to rot faster. Or you might have a manufacturing defect on the shingles, but it's a new 3-story construction and no one went and checked it.
Okay, because it looked great from the ground floor. It looked great.
Yeah, nice stucco, great curb appeal. But you get on the roof and you may see something different.
Okay, the roof, and then is there? I mean, when I was at GE, this always came up was elevators, and always had issues with elevators on these newer properties, 5-10 years old. Have you seen any issues with the elevators?
So you have hydraulic and electric, and so we have a third party that comes out, checks them out, and you just want to make sure your license is up to date and that any minor repairs. We looked at one just the other day. It's about $1,000. So it's when the older properties have an elevator, that's when you have issues. These newer ones, they stay on top of them pretty well.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine if tenants can't get to their units, they probably start crying out pretty loud. So, I mean, in the last 4 or 5 months, I see you on roofs, looking at a lot of properties. What are you seeing right now? And how are you helping people sort of through that process? And anything that we should be looking at for even. I mean, is there anything that you guys do for new investors coming in, buying a deal versus maybe existing investors? Let's say maybe they own the deal 3 or 4 years and they still own the deal. Is there anything that you do for those existing investors? So maybe talk about that.
Well, first, like I mentioned, there's a lot more deal flow coming back. And so, so I'm out on properties pretty often. And you're seeing kind of reserved enthusiasm. Like we hope everything's back to normal, but we're not sure yet. So investors are really trying to nail down the cost of rehab, making sure that they have all their numbers so there's no surprises. So I think I see a resurgence of really being careful on due diligence, right? On helping out investors, the newer ones, particularly on pricing that rehab. And one thing that I think kind of come across the most is they're really underpricing overall because material has gone up, labor has gone up, And so some of the rules of thumb that you might have used 2 years ago, you need to adjust those. So I know we're having to adjust our pricing.
What's my new rules of thumb? I got no rules yet. So what's the new rules of thumbs that I should have sort of back of the envelope on some of
So
these
here's a
deals?
good one. When you're driving the property, you say, "Hey, I want to paint this property," and it's a typical configuration with maybe 50% wood, 50% brick. What do I use? Well, I used to use $400 a unit.
Okay.
Well, that's now $450
Okay.
on a regular basis, right?
Okay.
So most properties are going to at least start, right? And then that's where you have a general idea of where you're going to fall. Another one, probably the biggest one, is interiors.
Hmm.
So I've heard it as low as like $4,000 to do an upgrade. That those days are kind of gone. So that was a few years old. So my units right now that I'm doing at cost are about $6,500.
So is
Now
that
we're doing a nice
flooring,
upgrade. Yeah, that's everything.
appliances, everything? Okay. All right. 6,000. Okay.
Yeah, 6,500. So don't forget that five.
6,500. Um, so what do you anticipate sort of going forward? So most of your projects now, are they just doing exteriors? Are investors, like, let's say you close the deal right now, are they coming in just doing all the exterior right away? Or some people we've been hearing, okay, I got to put up these reserves with Fannie and Freddie. Now I'm going to close the deal and I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait 9 months or 12 months. I get the money back and I'll use that money for my CapEx. Are you seeing people do that, or are people just starting right away, just going right at it?
Most that I work with are starting right away. Now, like I mentioned earlier, in this few months ago, when they really didn't know what was going on, that's when everyone held back. Here, they have the reserves and they're coming in and executing their CapEx plan.
Okay.
And that's what I'd recommend. So you have the money, you set it aside, you're still increasing the value of the property. And so that's what I'm doing on my own properties, right? We have this reserve set aside and we're putting it into the property.
All right. Is there anything that I did not ask you, or that I should know, but I just can't think of right now, and that you have seen, let's say in the last 6 months, something that investors should know out there?
Well, it's not just something I've seen. This recent extension of the moratorium for evictions has really frightened a lot of people. So I know some deals that we were going to go after and we're like, well, we're not sure.
Okay.
So, that cautious optimism is kind of what I see around. Sellers still want pre-COVID prices.
Sure.
Buyers don't want to pay pre-COVID prices. So you have that back and forth. And many times they're using the due diligence for that negotiation piece. Like, well, okay, I couldn't have argued about the roof a year ago, but now I'm arguing about the roof. That's
Okay.
what I'm seeing,
So it was seller's market for a long time. And then I think maybe for 1 month, it was a buyer's market. So like
Yeah.
March 15th to like April 15th, it was a buyer's market because everyone else dropped out. And then it flipped back to sort of in between, still a seller's market because there's a lot of people still bidding on deals right now. There's no doubt about that. But maybe there's a little bit, like I've seen people, and maybe you talk about this, is they've said, all right, well, I'm going to put up my 1% earnest money on the deal. And then, but I just want like 2 days. I'll sign the contract. I just want 2 days to sort of hit the major mechanicals. And then if I'm good, I'm not going to do interiors, but major mechanicals, do that. And is that something that you could help people, sort of like a mini access agreement to some extent, to get out there, check the roof, do the systems, all that type of stuff, before their money goes hard?
So definitely. And I've seen actually getting a little bit longer periods than that,
Okay.
in just a couple of days, maybe even a week or 2 weeks, right? So that's an area where I do see some flexibility. They still want the price,
Yep.
but okay, you can check it out a little bit more.
Okay.
So we're getting a little bit more time to access the boiler, the chiller, walk a couple of units of vacant units. So, and then your money goes hard. And also, earnest money is down a little bit. Now, you may be speaking more to that. I get a little more time to do my job, but it just feels like there's a little bit less upfront money and shorter time than it was 6 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think 6 months ago everything was 500,000, and
Yeah.
now it's like 1% of the purchase price, maybe 1.5%, 2%, depending on the size. So yeah, there's a little bit more flexibility on that piece. So Bryan, I appreciate it. What is the best way for people to reach out to you to either learn more about what you're doing or just contact you to schedule something?
So you can go to my webpage at theomnigroup.com. That's THEOMNI group.com, or just email me at bryanamos at theomnigroup.com.
Okay, so it's your full name, Bryan Amos
Yep, full
at
name
Omni
with a
Group.
Y.
Okay, all right, perfect. All right, thanks a lot, Bryan.
Thanks, James.